I still taste the ash, even now, decades removed from those grey plains, with lungs half replaced by augmetic filters and a mouth that barely remembers how to form words without mechanical assistance. I taste it. The ash of Vhalius IX. They tell me it's phantom sensation, neural echoes trapped in scar tissue where my old palate used to be. They're wrong. The ash is still there. It's always been there. It will be there when they finally burn this used-up body and scatter whatever's left to the recyc vats. I was 23 standard when the Munitorum assigned our regiment to the ash wastes. 23 and stupid with the kind of confidence that comes from never having seen real war. We'd done garrison duty on 3 worlds, parade formations, suppression of minor labor disputes, clean work. The kind where you fire last shots over crowds and watch them scatter, where the worst injury you see is a broken leg from a panicked stampede. I thought I knew what service to the Emperor meant. I thought I understood the weight of the uniform, the honor of the regiment, the brotherhood of the guard. The troop transport that delivered us to Vhalius smelled like recycled sweat and lubricant oil. Standard issue. We descended through atmosphere that looked like bruised skin, purple and grey and sick yellow where chemical storms turned the upper air into soup. Nobody talked much during final approach. Even the loudest soldiers, the ones who'd spent the void journey bragging about previous deployments, went quiet when they saw the surface through the viewports. Ash. Endless ash. Not the clean white ash of burned paper, but grey-black sludge that covered everything like the skin of a days-old corpse. It stretched from horizon to horizon, broken only by the skeletal remains of industrial structures jutting up like broken teeth. The planet had been a manufactorum world once, before the Orks came, before the Mechanicus attempted to deny the greenskins the facility's resources by implementing scorched earth protocols that burned for 6 standard months. The factories were gone. The workers were gone. The cities, the hab blocks, the temple shrines all gone. What remained was ash measured in meters, drifts of it piled against the husks of buildings, valleys of it between ridges of heat-fused slag, and the Orks. Always the Orks. Our commanding officer, Colonel Varric, was a thin man with a thin mustache and the kind of voice that never rose above a conversational tone even when ordering executions. He gathered us in the makeshift command post really, just a prefab shelter half buried in ash to protect against the wind, and explained our mission with the same tone he might use to discuss the weather. We were to hold the eastern approaches to what remained of Forge Complex Gamma 7. Intelligence indicated the Orks were gathering for a major offensive. Our job was to bleed them, slow them, make them pay for every meter of ash. "How long do we hold?" someone asked. Private Meloch, I think. Young kid. Couldn't have been more than 19. Varric looked at him with eyes that had already calculated the acceptable casualty ratio. "Until we're relieved, or until there's nothing left to hold with." That should have told me everything. It didn't. I was still stupid then. The ash got into everything. That was the first lesson Vhalius taught. It infiltrated lasgun power packs, clogging the connectors until weapons misfired or failed to fire at all. It worked its way into armor joints, grinding against seals and gaskets, wearing down the protective layer between flesh and environment. It filled boots, creating a constant abrasive presence that turned marching into an exercise in disciplined pain. And it coated our lungs with every breath, even through the rebreather masks that fogged and cracked in the chemical wind. We dug in, literally, lascutters and entrenching tools, carving fighting positions into the ash and slag. The digging revealed layers recent ash on top, then older deposits, then the fused industrial residue that formed the planet's new crust. Sometimes we'd break through into voids, empty spaces where buildings had collapsed in on themselves, creating hollow pockets filled with toxic gas, and, occasionally, the skeletal remains of whoever had lived there before the burning. I remember Corporal Thane pulling back from one such void, his rebreather mask torn away, gasping in the poisoned air. The flesh of his face blistered instantly, chemical burns spreading across his cheeks and forehead like fast-growing fungus. He screamed a sound that echoed off the ash drifts and died flat, absorbed by the grey wasteland. The Medicae took him. 3 days later he was back, face wrapped in sin-flesh bandages, eyes hollow with pain. They needed every rifle, every body. The Munitorum didn't waste resources on full recovery when partial function was sufficient. The Orks came on the 6th day. You could hear them before you saw them. That's important. That's the thing I need you to understand. In every tactical briefing, every intelligence report, every training simulation, they tell you about Ork ferocity, about their size and strength and crude technology. They don't tell you about the sound, the roaring, the constant, building roar that starts as a distant growl and swells until it's a physical pressure against your eardrums, until it's inside your skull, until it drowns out thought itself. They came over the ash ridge to the east, a green tide pouring down the grey slope like something alive and hungry. Hundreds of them. Thousands. I couldn't count. My mind couldn't process the numbers, couldn't reconcile what I was seeing with the neat formation diagrams from training. They were huge, each one easily twice the mass of a human soldier, with slabs of muscle under green skin, with tusks and crude armor, and weapons that looked like they'd been assembled from scrap and prayer and mad genius. First rank, fire. The order came through the Vox, steady and clear, and I raised my lasgun along with 200 others, and we fired into the green tide. Las bolts streaked across the ash waste, brilliant red lines cutting through the grey air. I saw Orks fall. I saw flesh burn and armor melt and bodies tumble down the slope. And I saw the tide keep coming. Saw it absorb our fire like water absorbs spit. Saw it surge forward without pause or hesitation. Second rank, fire. The synchronization was beautiful, exactly as we'd trained. First rank reloads, while second rank fires, maintaining continuous suppression. Textbook procedure. It should have worked. It would have worked against human enemies, against any rational force that understood the mathematics of attrition. Orks don't understand mathematics. They understand momentum. They understand the glorious joy of violence. They understand that death is just another form of entertainment, and that there's nothing more entertaining than a good fight. They were on us before the third volley. Just on us. Crashing into our positions like a green avalanche, bellowing that roar that bypassed cognition and went straight to the animal hindbrain, triggering every flight instinct evolution had bred into the human species. I watched Private Meloch, the kid who'd asked how long we'd hold, disappear beneath 3 Orks who seemed to compete for who could tear him apart most enthusiastically. I watched Sergeant Core, a 20-year veteran with commendations for valor, run. Just turn and run. Screaming, his lasgun dropped in the ash. An Ork caught him after 5 meters, grabbed him by the leg, and used him as a club to beat another guard trooper to death before tossing both bodies aside like broken toys. I shot the Ork that killed Meloch, put a lasbolt through its eye at 3 meters range. The eye exploded, leaking vitreous humor down its face, and the Ork reached up, poked at the ruined socket with one thick finger, then looked at me with its remaining eye and grinned. Grinned, like I'd told it a joke, like we were sharing something hilarious. Then it raised its weapon, this massive, crude thing that looked like someone had welded together pipes and bullets and prayers to violent gods, and fired. The shot missed me. Killed Trooper Vess, who was standing 2 meters to my left. Blew him apart in a spray of red that looked almost artistic against the grey ash, like someone had thrown paint across a canvas. The Ork looked disappointed, adjusted its aim. I rolled, pure reflex, training taking over where thought had fled. Heard the next shot crack past my head. Came up shooting, putting last bolts into the Ork's chest, its gut, its leg. It stumbled, roared, and charged me. Corporal Thane saved my life. Thane, with his bandaged face and hollow eyes, stepped into the Ork's path and shoved a grenade into its open mouth. The explosion was muffled, the Ork's body containing most of the blast, but the creature fell, finally, definitively dead. Thane looked at me through his bandages, nodded once, then his chest exploded as another Ork's shot found him, and he collapsed into the ash that was now mixing with blood, turning into a dark mud that sucked at our boots. We held for 40 minutes. Then Colonel Varric ordered the retreat. Retreat is a military term. It suggests order, discipline, controlled withdrawal. What we did was run. We abandoned our positions, our equipment, our dead. We ran through the ash, gasping through failing rebreathers, while the Ork horde pursued us with what sounded like laughter. They could have caught us easily. They were faster, stronger, more numerous. They didn't catch us because they were having too much fun shooting at us, watching us stumble and fall and die. I ran past Trooper Kenish, who'd stepped on a buried piece of slag and broken her ankle. She was sitting in the ash, trying to splint the break with her rifle. I ran past her, didn't stop, didn't help, just ran. Heard her screaming behind me as the Orks reached her position. The screaming lasted a long time. We fell back to secondary line Kappa, another set of prepared positions dug into the ash. Of the 300 soldiers who'd held the eastern approach, 78 made it back. The rest were dead or dying or simply gone, swallowed by the grey waste. Colonel Varric stood at the entrance to the command bunker, counting heads as we staggered past. His face showed nothing. No grief, no anger, no fear. Just that same calculating expression, like he was doing inventory on damaged equipment. That night, huddled in a trench with 6 other survivors, I heard Trooper Dine crying. Not sobbing, just quiet tears that cut tracks through the ash coating his face. Nobody told him to stop. Nobody told him to be strong, to remember his duty, to honor the fallen. We all understood. We'd all crossed some threshold that day, moved from the territory of soldiers into the territory of meat that happened to be alive at the moment. They're not supposed to be like that, Dine whispered. The briefings. They said Orks were undisciplined. Said they fought in mobs. Said they were easy to break with sustained fire. The briefings lied, someone else said. Private Horvath, I think. Older man, maybe 35, which made him ancient by Guard standards. Not deliberately. They just... The people who write briefings don't fight Orks. They don't understand. Understand what? I asked. My voice sounded strange to me, distant and hollow. Horvath was quiet for a long moment. Then, that they're winning. Not just here. Everywhere. They're winning because they're times better times at war than we are. Simpler. Purer. They don't need supply lines or logistical support or strategic objectives. They just need enemies to fight. And there's always more of them. That's heresy, Dine said reflexively. The Imperium is eternal. The Emperor protects. The Emperor's been dead for 10,000 years, Horvath replied. And he's not protecting us. Not here. Not on Vhalius. I should have reported Horvath. Should have called the Commissar. Had him executed for defeatism and heretical speech. I didn't. None of us did, because we all knew, in the deep places where faith doesn't reach, that he was right. The Orks came again on the 8th day, and the 12th, and the 15th. Each assault was the same, that building roar, that green tide, that brief, desperate resistance before we ran again. Each time we fell back to new positions. Each time fewer of us made the retreat. The ash waste became dotted with Guard equipment, abandoned weapons and armor, and the bodies we couldn't recover. Sometimes, during the brief periods between assaults, I could see the Orks in the distance, celebrating their victories. They'd build massive bonfires from the wreckage, roasting meat that I tried not to think about, bellowing their triumph at the grey sky. After 3 weeks, I stopped being able to sleep. The moment I closed my eyes, I'd see that grinning Ork face, that remaining eye full of joy as it tried to kill me. I'd hear Kenish screaming. I'd feel the ash in my lungs, coating my throat, working its way deeper with every breath. The Medicae gave me stimulants to stay awake and sedatives to force unconsciousness, but neither really worked. I existed in a grey space between waking and sleeping, performing my duties through muscle memory, while my mind floated somewhere distant. The real horror of war, I learned, isn't the violence, it's the routine. After a month, the assaults stopped being terrifying and became simply another part of the schedule. Wake at 0600. Choke down ration bars that tasted like ash because everything tasted like ash. Clean your weapon, knowing it wouldn't matter because the ash would clog it again within hours. Wait in your position, breathing through your rebreather, watching the eastern ridge. See the orcs come. Fight. Run. Count the survivors. Sleep if you could. Repeat. The survivors changed. We'd started as soldiers, individuals with names and personalities and histories. We became a collective, a single organism focused purely on survival. We stopped learning new people's names. What was the point when they'd be dead in a week? We stopped maintaining personal possessions. Everything would be left behind in the next retreat anyway. We stopped talking about home, about life after the war, about anything beyond the immediate present. The future didn't exist. There was only now, only the next assault, only the question of whether you'd see tomorrow's dawn. I killed my first orc with a combat knife in the 32nd day. We'd run out of power packs for the lasguns, the supply lines having collapsed sometime around week 3. The Munitorum kept promising resupply, kept sending Vox messages about convoys en route, but nothing arrived except more orders to hold our positions. So we fought with bayonets and knives and chunks of slag sharp enough to cut. I drove my blade into the soft spot beneath an orc's jaw, angling up into what I hoped was its brain. The blade stuck. The orc grabbed my arm, and I felt bones crack under its grip. Then Private Horvath shot it with one of our last remaining charged power packs, and the orc fell, taking my knife with it. The Medicae splintered my arm with pieces of conduit pipe and synthy skin. They couldn't properly set the bones. No time, no equipment, no point. The arm healed wrong, crooked and weak. Even now, with augmetic reinforcement and bone fusion treatments, it doesn't work quite right. I feel it every day, a permanent reminder of Vhalius, of the ash, of the orcs. On day 47, the orcs changed their tactics. Instead of massed frontal assaults, they began infiltrating our positions at night. Small groups, moving with impossible stealth for creatures so large, appearing suddenly in trenches and bunkers. They'd kill quickly and quietly, if orcs can ever be truly quiet, then disappear back into the ash waste before we could organize a response. We started finding bodies in the morning, guard troopers torn apart in their sleeping bags, sentries with their heads removed, entire fire teams simply gone. The fear that created was worse than the frontal assaults. At least with the charges, you could see them coming. You could prepare, fight, feel like you had some measure of control. The night infiltration stripped away even that illusion. Nowhere was safe. Sleep became impossible, not from lack of fatigue, but from terror of what might creep up while your eyes were closed. We implemented watch rotations, buddy systems, password challenges every 30 minutes. It didn't matter. The orcs kept coming, kept killing, kept fading back into the ash. After 2 weeks of this, Colonel Varric ordered illumination shells fired continuously through the night, turning the waste into a hellscape of flickering light and shadow. The shells ran out after 3 nights. The infiltrations continued. I was on watch when they took Private Horvath. He was sitting next to me, both of us staring into the darkness beyond the perimeter, both of us exhausted past the point of coherent thought. One moment he was there, the next, he wasn't. No sound, no struggle, just gone. I raised the alarm, and we swept the area, and found nothing except drag marks in the ash leading east, toward the orc lines. 3 days later, we found what was left of him. The orcs had impaled his body on a crude pike at the edge of their territory, a message we couldn't mistake. The body had been mutilated, but what disturbed me most was Horvath's face. Even in death, even after what they'd done to him, his expression wasn't fear or pain. It was something closer to relief. I understood. By then, I understood completely. Colonel Varric died on day 63. An orc sniper, and yes, they have snipers, despite what the briefings say, put a round through his head while he was surveying the line. The shot was impossibly precise, fired from over a kilometer away with a weapon that looked like it had been assembled from random components. Varek died instantly, which made him luckier than most of us. Command devolved to Major Kress, a logistics officer who'd never seen combat before Vhalius and who spent his first 3 hours in command vomiting from stress. Under Kress's leadership, discipline began to collapse. Soldiers stopped following orders, stopped maintaining their positions, stopped pretending any of this mattered. We were down to 47 effectives from the original 300, and reinforcements remained a perpetual promise that never materialized. The Munitorum sent daily Vox traffic demanding situation reports, casualty figures, resource inventories. We stopped responding after the first week. What was the point? The Orks knew. I'm certain they knew we were broken. They could have overrun our positions at any time, could have wiped us out with a single determined assault. They didn't. They kept up the pressure just enough to prevent us from routing completely, kept us alive and afraid, kept the game going. I think they were having fun. I think, to Orks, a fight that's too easy isn't worth having. They wanted us to struggle. They wanted us to resist just enough to make the killing interesting. On day 71, the last Vox unit died. The batteries had finally failed, the machinery succumbing to accumulated ash damage. We were cut off. No communication with command, no possibility of calling for support, no way to even confirm the war was still happening beyond our grey corner of the ash waste. For all we knew, the Imperium had written off Vhalius, declared it lost, moved on to other battles. We were ghosts, already dead, just too stubborn to stop moving. Trooper Dane hanged himself on day 73, used his rifle sling and a piece of structural support in the command bunker. Nobody tried to stop him. Nobody cut him down for hours. We all understood, by then, that he'd found the only real escape available. The Commissar arrived on day 78. I don't know where he came from. Don't know how he reached us through the Ork-controlled territory. He just appeared one morning, walking out of the ash waste in his black coat and peaked cap, bolt pistol holstered at his hip, looking like death personified. Major Kress nearly shot him, thinking he was some kind of Ork trick. Commissar Volkov was not interested in our suffering. He stood in the center of our remaining positions, 42 survivors gathered in the grey morning, and explained in a voice like grinding metal that we had failed in our duty, that our casualties were unacceptable, that our loss of discipline was heretical, that by rights he should execute every one of us for cowardice and dereliction. But, he continued, and his cold eyes swept across us, the Emperor is merciful. You will be given one chance at redemption. The chance was simple. We would advance. We would push into Ork territory. We would assault their positions and kill as many as possible before we died. Because we would die, Volkov was clear about that. But we would die doing our duty, serving the Emperor, rather than cowering in holes like animals. You have 1 hour to prepare, he said. Any man who refuses to advance will be executed immediately. Any man who retreats without orders will be executed immediately. Any man who shows cowardice will be executed immediately. The Emperor protects those who serve with faith. Demonstrate your faith. I think some of the soldiers believed him, wanted to believe that dying in an attack would somehow redeem us, would give meaning to the months of horror and loss. I knew better. This wasn't redemption. This was disposal. We were broken equipment, being expended in one final, pointless gesture. The Commissar didn't care about our faith or our service. He cared about military regulations that said you couldn't abandon a position without proper casualty ratios, and we hadn't died fast enough to satisfy the bureaucracy. But what choice did we have? Stay and be executed, or advance and die fighting? At least the latter offered the slim possibility of taking some Orks with us. We advanced at 0800 on day 79. 42 soldiers walking into the ash waste, moving toward the Ork positions we'd spent months running from. No artillery support, no air cover, no reinforcements. Just us and our failing weapons and the grey ash that continued to coat everything, to fill our lungs, to mark our passage with footprints that would last until the next chemical wind erased them. The Orks saw us coming. Of course they did. They were waiting, probably had been waiting for something exactly like this. We heard the roaring start before we'd covered half the distance, that building sound that I'd learned meant death and pain and terror. But this time, something was different. This time, I felt nothing. No fear, no determination, no rage or hope or despair, just emptiness. The ash had gotten inside, finally, all the way down to whatever made me human, and had smothered it. We reached their first line around 0830. The Orks poured out of bunkers and trenches that looked like they'd been excavated by hand, weapons raised, bellowing their joy. We fired. They fired. Bodies fell on both sides. I shot an Ork in the face and watched it stumble backward, and felt nothing. Shot another in the chest, and felt nothing. A third caught me with a glancing blow from some kind of crude axe, tearing through my armor and opening my side from hip to ribs. I felt the impact, felt the blood, but the pain was distant, belonging to someone else. Trooper Essek died next to me, his head pulped by an Ork's club. The body stayed on its feet for 3 seconds, muscles still firing, rifle still trying to aim, before it collapsed. Private Yenish lost both legs to an explosion, lay in the ash screaming while his blood turned the grey to black. Commissar Volkov strode through the chaos like it couldn't touch him, bolt pistol firing with methodical precision, each shot killing an Ork, his face showing no more emotion than when he'd delivered our death sentence. We pushed forward. Somehow, impossibly, we pushed forward. Over the Ork trench line, into their territory, killing and dying with equal efficiency. I stopped being able to track individual moments. Everything blurred together, the roaring, the shooting, the ash kicking up in clouds, the green bodies and the red blood and the grey background that swallowed it all. I found myself in an Ork bunker, fighting 3 of them with a combat knife and nothing else. My lasgun had failed, power pack dead, and mechanisms jammed with ash. One Ork hit me hard enough to crack ribs, and I felt the bones break like dry sticks, and still felt nothing. Just stabbed it, over and over, finding gaps in its armor, until it finally fell. The second one grabbed my knife arm, started bending it backward, and I used my free hand to claw at its eyes. The third one shot me. The round took me in the left shoulder, punched through the armor and the flesh beneath, shattered the joint into fragments. My arm went dead immediately, hanging useless. I fell. The Ork loomed over me, raising its weapon for a finishing shot, and I saw its face clearly for the first time. It was grinning, just like that first Ork, all those weeks ago, like this was the best entertainment it had ever experienced. Then Commissar Volkov killed it. Bolt pistol round to the head, explosive payload detonating inside the skull, green matter splattering across the bunker walls. He looked down at me, his expression showing mild curiosity, like I was an interesting insect. "Can you still fight?" he asked. I tried to stand. Got halfway up before the pain finally penetrated the numbness, and I collapsed again. The Commissar nodded, as if this confirmed something he'd suspected. "Then you've served adequately," he said, and walked out of the bunker, leaving me there. I should have died in that bunker. Should have bled out from my wounds, alone in Ork territory. Just another casualty in a battle nobody would remember. But a guard recovery team found me 3 hours later, after the assault had somehow impossibly succeeded. We'd driven the Orks back. Our 42 soldiers, through sheer desperate violence, had done what months of proper military tactics had failed to accomplish. Of the 42 who advanced, 7 survived. I was one of them. The Commissar was another. He'd emerged from the battle without a scratch, his uniform still immaculate despite the carnage, like the violence simply didn't apply to him. They shipped us off-world 2 weeks later, once proper Imperial forces finally arrived to hold Vhalius. I spent the evacuation in a medical bay, my body held together with sin flesh and temporary augmetics, my mind floating in a drug haze that did nothing to banish the ash from my dreams. The medici said I was lucky, said my injuries, while severe, were survivable with proper treatment, said I'd recover, return to duty, serve the Emperor for decades to come. They were right about some of that, wrong about the rest. The injuries healed, after a fashion. The augmetics and organ replacements and reconstructive surgery left me functional, able to walk and eat and perform basic duties. But the ash didn't leave. It stayed in my lungs, in my throat, coating the inside of my mouth with that grey-black taste that no amount of treatment could eliminate. The Medicae said it was impossible. They'd flushed my respiratory system, replaced damaged tissue, filtered my blood. But I knew the truth. The ash wasn't just physical anymore. It was part of me. Vhalius had gotten inside, and it would never leave. I served another 40 years after Vhalius. They gave me a desk job, logistics and resource management, shuffling personnel and equipment across subsectors. Good work for a damaged soldier, productive but safe. I processed casualty reports from dozens of worlds, tracked regiment deployments and ammunition shipments and food supplies. Every day, I helped send soldiers to die in the Emperor's name, contributed to the great machine of imperial warfare. And every day, I tasted the ash. I saw Commissar Volkov once more, 30 years after Vhalius. I was in the Munitorum headquarters on Cadia Prime, delivering personnel reassignment documents, when I passed him in a corridor. He looked exactly the same, not aged, not marked by time or experience, still wearing that black coat and cold expression. I stopped, frozen, memories flooding back. The ash waste, the Orks, the 42 soldiers marching to their deaths. He looked at me without recognition. Just another damaged soldier, another piece of broken equipment, still limping along. Then he continued past, walking toward whatever duty consumed him now, and I stood there in the corridor, tasting ash, understanding finally and completely that none of it had mattered. Not our suffering, not our deaths, not our desperate final assault. We were numbers in a report, acceptable casualties, assets expended in accordance with Munitorum regulations. The Imperium doesn't care about your service. It doesn't honor your sacrifice. It consumes you, processes you, and moves on to the next body. And if you survive, if you have the misfortune to live when you should have died, you spend the rest of your existence tasting ash and remembering the moment you learned what the Emperor's protection actually means. I'm old now. The augmetics are failing, my body finally giving out after decades of patched repairs. They've assigned me to a retirement hospice, a grey building on a grey world where old soldiers come to die quietly. The Medicae come every morning to check my vitals, to adjust my drug regimen, to mark off another day on their charts. They're kind, in their clinical way. They don't understand why I refuse the sedatives that would ease my passing. I need to stay awake, need to taste the ash, because if I let the drugs take me, if I slip into that peaceful darkness they're offering, I'll forget. And forgetting feels like the final betrayal of Meloch, of Thane, of Horvath and Dane and Essek and Yenish and all the others whose names I can barely remember, who died in the grey waste while I somehow survived. Last week, a young commissar visited the hospice. Recruitment duty, looking for stories to inspire new soldiers. He wanted me to talk about Vhalius, about our glorious stand against the Ork menace, about faith and duty and the Emperor's protection. I told him the truth instead, told him about the ash, about watching friends torn apart for entertainment, about the advance that was really an execution, about the taste that never leaves. He reported me for defeatist speech. The hospice administrator assured me there would be no punishment. I'm too old, too broken, too close to death for it to matter. But she looked at me differently after that, with a mixture of pity and disgust, like I'm something unclean that has somehow contaminated the proper order of things. Maybe I am. Maybe Vhalius broke something fundamental in me, some capacity for faith or hope or belief in the righteousness of imperial service. Maybe I should have died in that Ork bunker, should have bled out in the ash where I belonged. Instead, I lived, and carried the ash with me, and contaminated everything I touched with the knowledge of what we really are, what the Imperium really does with its soldiers. Tomorrow, the Medicae say, will probably be my last day. My augmetic lungs are failing, and there's no point in replacing them again. They'll make me comfortable, they say. Ease my passing. Let me go peacefully. But there's no peace. Not for me. Not for any of us who fought in the ash wastes and survived to carry that grey poison forward. When I die, and I will die, probably before the sun sets tomorrow, I'll die tasting ash, remembering the roar of orcs, seeing Horvath's relieved expression and Melek's terror, and that grinning orc face that's been burned into my memory for 5 decades. And maybe, in whatever comes after, I'll finally stop tasting it, stop carrying Vhalius with me, stop being the broken thing that limped away from the grey waste while better soldiers died. But I doubt it. The ash is eternal. It gets inside, all the way down to whatever passes for a soul, and it never leaves. It's still there, coating my thoughts, filling my mouth, reminding me with every breath that I survived when I shouldn't have, that my life was purchased with the deaths of men and women whose names I can't even remember anymore. That's what it's like to fight orcs in the ash wastes. Not the fighting itself that's just violence, brutal and simple. It's what comes after. The knowledge that you're nothing, that your service means nothing, that all your suffering and loss and desperate courage amounts to exactly nothing in the great grinding machinery of the Imperium. And the ash. Always the ash. Even now, as my augmetic lungs seize and the medicae rush to my bedside with their sedatives and their useless compassion, I taste it, grey and bitter and eternal. I still taste the ash. I always will.